Hi, everyone. I'm currently teaching a undergraduate course in clinical psychology and find that the enthusiasm of my students is matched only by their curiosity, knowledge, and considering that the lectures are 2.5 hours long with a professor who tries to be funny but winds up primarily punny, their good nature and chesed to this old man. This week we were studying different types of psychological tests. I'm pretty fond of one projective test known as the house tree person. Not much for its predictive ability of mental health diagnosis, as much as it offers insight into the various aspects of a person's thoughts and feelings about the world in an indirect way. It also makes for great conversation in a class, as my students discovered when we looked at one example from a famous individual. Somehow, internally, a house somehow is supposed to remind people about familiar relationships and is symbolic of them. A picture of the self is often representative of one's personal self perception. And somehow, a drawing of a tree is supposed to be symbolic of the drawer's growth, stability, and emotional health. Well, one of my inquisitive students asked me, why a tree? And I told him that if we were to draw anything else, it probably wouldn't be a house tree person test. But really, I told him it was because one day we were going to learn about this particular class in a class the week of Parshas Terumah. Let me explain. Parshas Terumah, which we'll read this coming Shabbos, details the commands for the procurement of the materials for and some of the construction plans of the Mishkan, the tabernacle in the desert. While numerous items were utilized in the various construction of the Mishkan and its kalim, its appliances, there's one that seems to come up quite a bit. I refer to the Atzei Shittim, the Akasha wood. We find that it was this wood that made up the Aron, the ark, the Shulchan, the table that held the Lechem Apanim, the showbreads, the Krushim, the planks that comprised the structure of the Mishkan, and the Mizbeach, the outer altar of the Mishkan that the offerings were offered upon. All four were made from Atzei Shittim. All four highlight themselves in Parshas Terumah. Why are the Atzei Shittim so fundamental to Parshas Terumah and to the functioning of the house of Hashem, the Mishkan? Why the stress on trees and Atzei Shittim in particular? And if trees are so important, why are they always hidden? I mean, seriously, if it happened once, that would be understandable. But in our parsha, it happens multiple times. The aron is to be made of Atzei Shittim, but the wood is covered both inside and outside by gold. The shulchan is to be constructed with Atzei Shittim, but again, covered in gold. The krushim, the planks, are to be made Atzei Shittim omdim, but covered in gold. And the mizbeach too, made of Atzei Shittim, this time covered in copper. Now, if Atzei Shittim are so important that they're used so often in the Mishkan, why not give them a starring role? Why are they always hidden? And what's Atzei Shittim omdim anyway? What do those words mean? Perhaps before we answer our questions, it might help if we knew another thing about these Atzei Shittim. You know, Rashi cites a Medrash Tanchuma, which tells us that the Atzei Shittim came from Yaakov Avinu through Ruach HaKodesh, through a spiritual sense that his children would one day build a Mishkan in the desert. And so hence, says the Medrash, he brought Atzei Shittim and planted them in Egypt, and told his children that when they leave, that they should take the trees with them. Now, if it were so important to take the materials for the Mishkan, why didn't Yaakov prepare all of the materials, the gold, the silver, the copper, or the tachash? Why only the Atzei Shittim? I guess, of course, it depends on what the trees stand for and what you and I stand for as well. Let me explain. The Talmud offers three interpretations for what Atzei Shittim omdim means. The Gemara in Yuma declares, Amar Rav Chama Reb Chanina said, "My diksiv Atzei Shittim omdim." What is the meaning of that which is said? You should make the Atzei Shittim of acacia wood standing. So the Gemara says, first of all, she'omdim derech dei lasan. The pasuk teaches us that the boards should stand in the same direction which they grew from the ground as a tree. Davar acher, an additional level of interpretation. Omdim, they stand, shemamidin es tzipuyam. Standing means they support the gold plating or the copper plating and keep it from falling off. And then the Gemara says, Davar acher, another thing. Omdim, standing, Shema Tomar Avad Sivranu Batel Sikuyan. Maybe standing is to hint that one day you'll say that now that the Mishkan is no longer in use, the boards have no hope. Their hope is lost. Their chance is abandoned. And after being stored away, they will no longer come back to use. Talmud Lomar Omdim, She'omdim Liolam Uleolamim. It teaches us that these boards are standing. They are going to stand forever and ever. Yes, there are 3 lessons to be learned from Atzei Shitim. They are to stand in the direction in which they grew from the ground. They are to support the covering. And they symbolically remind us that one should never give up hope, that we're never lost. Independently, these seem like nice lessons, but in truth, if we combine the 3 lessons, there's a much deeper lesson to be learned and gained. Rav Yaakov Kamenetsky Zatzal noted that the message behind Yaakov's planting the cedar trees in Egypt was rooted in solid logic. Rav Yaakov noted that Yaakov Avinu had already declared Pakod Yivkod as the secret code word that the Jews would wait for in order to know that Hashem would ultimately redeem them. However, words can lose their value over time. Indeed, when Moshe brought the message of Pakod Yivkod, the people were too drained to hear it. Mikotzer Ruach, because of the shortness of spirit, Ume'avodah kasha, and from the hard work. However, Rav Yaakov opines, what held them together close to the idea of an impending hope for Geula was the fact that they were going to look at Yaakov Avinu's trees. The people would go into the forest and they would see the results of Yaakov's initial planning and planting and his work in maintaining those hidden trees in anticipation of a Geula, and see that as time went on, those trees would grow and flourish, and that Yaakov's children would find a renewed inner strength, that Hashem would redeem them, and they would take the trees at that time. Yaakov didn't just talk Geula Bitachon, he prepared for it by hand, and it showed the people that, like the trees, Am Yisrael will stand forever. But there are threats that to that connection to Hashem that brings the Geula. The biggest, as we've seen from our study of Nevi'im Achronim, is the haughtiness of the leadership and the interest in all that glitters. Time and time again, the Nevi'im warned the people, especially the leadership, not to oppress those weaker than they, or enrich themselves inappropriately. Indeed, the late Rav Chaim Yaakov Goldvich, founding Rosh Hashiva of Karen Biavnev and of the entire Hesder movement, cited a medrash which states that big and glittery things tend to get used for evil. These items become corruptible when they stand on their own, or become the central focus of one's or a nation's desires. And to that, the Gemara notes that the antidote is Omdim Shemamidim Es Tzipuyam. The Atzei Shitim, as Rav Goldvicht explained, would hold on to the gold or the copper. They would merely adorn the tree, not direct its focus. And at the core of each utensil or use in the Mishkan, it would be the focus on Hashem by each member of Am Yisrael, each, by the way, represented by one of the crushing planks that stood derech gedei latan, on solid footing, the way they were brought up, with a strong focus spiritually upward, utilizing anything and everything attached to it, directing it towards the service of Hashem. The secret of the Atzei Shitim at the base of so much in the Mishkan is a reminder to us that we do not always need to wear our secret inner strength on the outside. In fact, sometimes in order to protect our growing core from rot, we actually cover it in places where our inner Torah values might otherwise be corrupted. But even in these moments, we continue to stand tall, proud, and golden. Rav Elia Meir Blach, the late Telzer Rosh Hashiva, notes that to maintain and grow spiritually, you got to build. And Rav Menachem Ginag, my Yerodei Rebbe and the head of the OU Kosher Division, added that this is why we needed to build the Mishkan at the end of a Sefer HaGeula. As the children of Avraham and Yaakov, we needed to finish the actions that they started of making Geula happen. It's what brings the Sefer HaGeula ultimately to its completion. So yes, we're really very much like the trees, at least symbolically. As Jews, we are to see ourselves in those Atzei Shitim that were the bitachon base of the Mishkan that we built back then. And by the way, the one that we're going to build ourselves today, even when Korbanot, Rahman al-Litzlan, continue to mount. Rav Yitzchak Kutner famously and poetically noted, Bilvavi Mishkan Evnei Lahadar Kvodo. In my heart, I'm going to build a Mishkan, just like the one that was built in order to go ahead and glorify Hashem's honor. Mishkan Mizbeach Hasim LeKarnei Hodo, and I'm going to put a Mizbeach right there in my Mishkan, dedicated to Hashem's divining rays of splendor. Ulener Tamida Kachli Esesha Akeda. For the eternal flame, I'll take the fire that fueled the Akedas Yitzchak, a moment of tremendous bitachon. Ula Karbana Krivloes Nafshi. And for the carbon, I'll offer God my soul. Nes Nafshi Hayechida, my unique soul. When we build our bitachon with actions, and we keep ourselves focused on growth like the Shivtim would at our core, we will be able to stand tall and proud, growing upward towards Hashem, and thriving evermore. Wishing you and yours a Shabbat Shalom and a Shabbat Shalom to all.